He returned to his late father's ranch after 10 long years, bringing his little daughter with him. Everyone in town said there was nothing left, just ruins, silence, and dust. But what they found inside the old barn shocked everyone and changed their lives forever. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. The road that led to the Carter Ranch stretched endlessly ahead, a winding scar of cracked asphalt cutting through the dry plains. The pickup's engine groaned as it climbed a slow hill, dust rising in a gray cloud behind it. Inside, the air was thick with silence. Andrew Carter sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping it tightly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as though afraid that if he looked away, the land itself might vanish. In the passenger seat, his 10-year-old daughter Lily pressed her face against the window, watching as the weeds brushed against the truck's sides. She was small for her age, pale from too many years spent in the city, and her hair, the same warm brown as her mother's, was tied in a loose braid that had begun to come undone during the long drive. They had been on the road since dawn. The city had disappeared hours ago, replaced by empty stretches of land that grew more familiar and foreign with each passing mile. Andrew had not spoken much, and Lily had stopped trying after her third question had been met with a distracted nod. The silence between them wasn't cold, only heavy, a silence filled with everything they both remembered, but didn't yet know how to say. She clutched an old stuffed bear in her lap, one ear singed and missing fur on its paw, the last thing she'd saved from the night of the fire. When the first outline of the ranch appeared in the distance, the faint shape of a windmill and a leaning fence, Andrew slowed the truck. The engine sputtered before falling quiet. He sat there for a long time, staring out through the cracked windshield. 10 years. It felt impossible. 10 years since the night the flames turned his father's fields into black ash. 10 years since they had fled in the rain, his wife coughing into his shoulder as the smoke swallowed their home. 10 years since he'd promised her they'd come back when things were better, a promise broken first by grief, then by fear, and finally by the slow weight of life that had no room for hope. Now he was here again, the promise finally kept, though the one he'd made it to was gone. "Is this it?" Lily's voice was soft, uncertain. Andrew nodded, his throat too tight to answer. He stepped out, his boots sinking into the dry earth, and walked toward the sagging wooden gate. The sign that once read Carter Ranch was barely legible, the paint flaked away by wind and time. He pushed the gate open, and its rusty hinges gave a long, complaining groan. The sound carried across the empty fields, as if the land itself was waking after a long sleep. The house stood at the center of it all, stripped of life. The porch roof had caved in on one side, and the windows were hollow, staring back at him like open wounds. The wind blew through the broken slats, making a sound like a sigh. Lily came to stand beside him, clutching the bear to her chest. "Did you live here when you were little?" she asked. He nodded again. "Yeah, this was home. But it's all broken," he smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. "So am I, kiddo." They walked through the overgrown yard together. The grass brushed against Lily's knees, tall and wild, dotted with the ghosts of what once had been flower beds. Near the porch, a rusted milk pail lay half buried in the dirt, and beside it, a horseshoe, blackened by fire. When Andrew picked it up, soot crumbled between his fingers. The air smelled of dry wood and dust, but underneath it lingered something else, a faint sweetness, like clover after rain. He couldn't tell if it was real or just memory. Inside, the house was worse. The kitchen roof had collapsed in places, letting in strips of pale light that cut through the gloom. Every surface was thick with dust. The old dining table still stood, its top warped, and one leg cracked where it had burned. On the far wall, a family photograph hung crookedly, the glass shattered. He stepped closer and saw himself there, younger, smiling, an arm around his wife, their baby girl in her arms. The edges of the picture were singed. He traced a finger along it and whispered her name, barely audible. "Mom?" Lily asked behind him. He turned quickly, swallowing the ache that rose in his throat. "Yeah," he said quietly, "your mom." Lily stepped closer to look, standing on tiptoe. "She's pretty." She was. He forced a small smile. She loved this place, said it was the only spot in the world where the stars didn't hide. They explored the rest of the house slowly, careful not to step on loose boards. Lily found a piece of wallpaper still clinging to the wall of what used to be her room, a pattern of blue stars fading into the plaster. She ran her fingers over it and whispered, "I think I remember this." Andrew didn't correct her, though she had been only a baby when they left. Maybe the memory lived in her bones, the same way it lived in his. When evening came, they made camp in the living room. Andrew cleared a space on the floor, spreading out a worn blanket and a pair of sleeping bags. He lit a small fire in the old stone hearth. The chimney was half collapsed, but it still drew the smoke upward. The orange glow filled the room, flickering across the blackened walls. Lily ate quietly from a tin of beans, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Do you think we'll stay here long?" she asked. Andrew looked around at the ruin that had once been home. "We'll see," he said. "We'll stay until we know what to do next." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window frames. It carried a sound, faint, almost like footsteps moving through dry grass. Andrew froze for a moment, listening. It wasn't the wind. Something was alive out there. But when he stood and peered through the dark, he saw only the empty yard. Probably coyotes, he told himself. The land was full of them. He threw another piece of wood into the fire and sat back down. Lily had already drifted off, her small hand resting on the bear's worn paw. That night he barely slept. The house creaked around him, as though remembering every step that had ever been taken inside it. He stared up through a hole in the roof, where a triangle of stars blinked cold and distant. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring deep inside. Not peace, not yet, but a pull, as if the land itself were whispering, "You came back." When dawn came, the sky was pale gold, and the air smelled of dew. Andrew rose quietly, his body stiff, and stepped outside. The field stretched endless before him, touched by mist. He could see the old barn at the edge of the property, its doors hanging crooked, the roof half gone. The sound he'd heard in the night came again, a faint rustle, a low grunt, the shuffle of hooves against dirt. He hesitated, then began to walk toward it. The morning was still, the only sound his boots crunching over dry grass. As he neared the barn, a shadow darted inside. He froze, too large for a fox, too steady for the wind. He pushed the door open, and the hinges moaned in protest. At first, all he saw was darkness and dust. The smell was thick, old wood, mold, and something else. Something alive. Then, as his eyes adjusted, movement began to emerge from the gloom. A hen fluttered up from the floorboards, feathers scattering. A soft clucking echoed through the rafters. Another sound followed, a snort, deep and heavy. Andrew turned his head and saw in the far stall a horse. It was thin, its ribs visible beneath its dull coat, but its eyes were bright, alert. It stared at him, ears flicking, muscles tense. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the horse took a cautious step forward, nostrils flaring. Andrew's heart pounded. He hadn't expected this. Life here after so long. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice low and calm. the way his father used to speak to nervous animals. "Easy, boy." From the corner of his eye, he saw more shapes. A pair of pigs, their hides rough with dried mud, rooting in a pile of old straw. Chickens perched on broken beams above. And there, near the back wall, 3 dogs, ribs showing, fur matted, watching him with cautious eyes. He stepped back slowly, stunned. "Lily!" he called. Moments later, she came running from the house, her bare feet thudding against the ground. "What is it?" "Come see." She slipped past him into the barn and gasped. "They're alive!" Andrew nodded, still trying to believe it himself. Somehow. The dogs growled softly, uncertain, but one of them, a black one with a white patch on its chest, crept forward, sniffing the air. Lily crouched down, holding out her hand. "Hey there," she whispered. "It's okay." To Andrew's amazement, the dog edged closer until it touched her fingers with its nose. The others stayed back, watching. "How did they survive?" she asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe they found water somewhere. Maybe they just refused to give up." The horse snorted again, stamping once. Andrew moved slowly toward it, palm out. The animal's breath was warm against his skin. He could feel the tremor of its life, fragile yet stubborn. Behind him, Lily whispered, "They waited for us, didn't they?" He didn't answer. His throat was tight. He looked around at the barn, at the creatures that had made it their home despite everything, and felt something inside him shift. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt a flicker of purpose. When they left the barn, the sun had risen higher, spilling light across the fields. The house still looked broken, but the land no longer felt dead. It felt patient, waiting. That evening they sat again by the fire, eating in silence. Lily leaned against him, her head on his arm. "Dad?" she said softly. "If the animals didn't give up, maybe we don't have to either." He looked at her, at the hope in her small face, and nodded slowly. Maybe not. The wind carried the faint sounds of the barn, the quiet clucking of hens settling for the night, the steady breath of the horse, the distant bark of a dog. It all blended together into something that felt almost like peace. As the stars came out, Andrew looked toward the horizon, where the dark outline of the barn stood against the fading sky. For years he had believed that the past was buried and gone. But now he understood. Some things don't die. They wait for someone brave enough to come home. The following days unfolded like the slow unfurling of a forgotten memory. Morning after morning, Andrew woke to the same soft light filtering through the broken windows, to the distant clucking from the barn, to the sound of his daughter's light footsteps on the creaking floorboards. Each dawn felt different from the one before. The first had been heavy with disbelief, the second with uncertainty. But by the third, he began to sense something stirring in both the land and in himself. The house was still in ruin, the walls scarred and the roof half gone, yet the air around it seemed to carry a new pulse, faint, fragile, but unmistakably alive. He began with the simple things. The barn, despite its age, was the heart of the ranch now. The animals depended on it, and the animals were all that stood between this place and desolation. Each morning he checked the troughs, clearing the grime and filling them with water from the well, though the old pump needed repair. His father had taught him to fix things with what he had, not with what he wished for, and those lessons came back like the rhythm of a song he'd once known by heart. He scavenged through the wreckage behind the house, collecting nails still usable, bits of wire, a cracked hammer handle that he bound with rope. Lily followed him everywhere, her energy tireless. Her small hands carried boards and buckets, her shoes quickly ruined from mud and dust. She gave names to everything. The old horse she called Star. The black dog became Shadow, and the cow that mooed constantly no matter the hour was Gracie. The names stuck. Andrew found himself using them, too. Sometimes, when he caught his daughter whispering to the animals, he could almost believe the ranch was listening. The first real challenge came with the well. The water was there, but it was buried under years of neglect. The stone lining had caved in along one side, and dead leaves clogged the bottom. Andrew worked for hours under the sun, his hands raw, sweat burning in his eyes. He tied a rope around his waist, lowered himself down as far as he dared, and cleared the muck by the bucketful. When at last he hit water that shimmered clean and cold beneath the surface, he laughed aloud, a deep, rough sound that startled even him. He shouted for Lily, and she came running barefoot, her hair tangled and her face shining with pride as he hauled up the first full bucket. They drank together, and it tasted like something holy. That evening, when the sky burned orange and purple, he sat beside the fire outside the house, while Lily fed scraps of bread to Shadow and the other dogs. They had begun to trust them now, no longer slinking away at every step. The black one lay near the fire, head resting on its paws, its eyes half closed. The world around them was quiet except for the rustle of wind in the grass. Andrew's body ached from work, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from purpose rather than exhaustion. In town, the news of his return had spread faster than he'd hoped. 2 men had come by on horseback that afternoon, neighbors from the old days. They hadn't dismounted, just sat in their saddles near the gate, curiosity and disbelief on their faces. "You really came back," one had said, spitting dust from his mouth. "Thought you'd have more sense." Andrew had smiled thinly, choosing not to answer. They had looked over the ruined barn, the patched fences, the small figure of Lily carrying water in a dented pail, and exchanged a glance before riding off. Their laughter had carried faintly on the wind. Later that week, another visitor came, Bill Hansen, who owned the property next to what used to be his father's north pasture. Hansen had grown richer since the fire, buying up land, piece by piece from those who'd given up. He arrived in a polished truck, his boots clean, his shirt tucked tight into his belt. "Didn't think anyone would be fool enough to try living out here again," he said, as he stepped out, shading his eyes against the sun. "Heard you were back. Thought I'd see it for myself." Andrew wiped his hands on his jeans. "It's home," he said simply. Hansen looked around, unimpressed. "Home? This place is finished, Carter. You'd do better selling it. I've got a buyer lined up. Some company wants to put solar panels on the ridge. You could make enough to start fresh somewhere else." "Not interested," Hansen smirked. "Not interested, or can't let go of your daddy's ghosts." Andrew's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Both, maybe." The man studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. But the bank doesn't care about ghosts. Taxes don't pay themselves. Think on it before this land swallows you whole." He climbed back into his truck, dust rising behind him as he drove away. That night, Andrew sat by the fire longer than usual, staring into the flames until they blurred. Lily sat beside him, quiet but watchful. "Who is that man?" she asked at last. "Just someone who doesn't understand what this place means." "Then tell him," she said. "Tell him it's ours." He looked at her, surprised by the firmness in her small voice. "You like it here that much already?" She nodded. "It feels like Mom's still here, like she's part of everything. The grass, the animals, even the wind." Andrew turned away, blinking against the sting in his eyes. The wind did carry her name sometimes, or maybe that was just his heart remembering how to hope. In the days that followed, the rhythm of life on the ranch deepened. The chores were endless, yet strangely satisfying. He repaired the pen for the pigs, mended the fence around the corral, and cleared the brush that had swallowed half the yard. Lily took charge of the chickens, proud of every egg she found, showing them to him like treasures. They ate simply, bread, beans, whatever they could buy cheap in town. But it felt like a feast compared to the silence of their old apartment. One morning, while he was stacking firewood near the barn, Lily came running toward him, her voice breathless with excitement. "Dad, come quick!" He dropped the axe and followed her. In the dim light of the barn, the old horse was restless, its sides heaving. Straw scattered as it shifted, nostrils flaring. Beneath it lay something small and trembling, a foal, slick with birth, struggling to stand. Andrew froze. For a moment he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The horse had been alone for years, thin and aging, and yet here was new life, fragile, unsteady, but alive. Lily knelt beside it, her hands gentle. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Can we keep him?" Andrew let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "He's ours already." She looked up at him. "Can I name him?" He nodded. She thought for a long moment, then said, "Hope." The name fit. That night, while the foal lay curled beside its mother, a storm began to gather on the horizon. At first it was only a low rumble, the kind that rolled far away like distant drums. Then the wind came, sharp and sudden, carrying the smell of rain. Andrew watched the sky darken, his gut tightening. He remembered too well what storms could do. By midnight, the heavens broke open. Rain lashed against the house, thunder shook the earth, and the barn groaned under the assault. Andrew grabbed his coat and boots. "Stay inside," he shouted to Lily. But she was already at the door, her eyes wide with fear. "The animals!" she cried. He didn't argue. Together they ran through the sheets of rain, the wind pushing against them like a living thing. The ground had turned to mud, sucking at their feet. Inside the barn, chaos reigned. Chickens flapping wildly, the pigs squealing, the dogs barking in panic. The old boards creaked and shifted, water pouring through the cracks in the roof. "Get them to the corner," Andrew shouted over the roar. Lily hurried to gather the smaller animals, coaxing them with soft words, her face pale in the flickering light of the lantern. Andrew fought to brace the doors against the wind, hammering boards into place, while rain drenched him to the bone. The horse reared once, terrified, and he grabbed its reins, murmuring to it until it calmed. The foal stumbled, crying softly, and Lily threw a blanket over it, shielding it with her small body. Hours passed like that, the world reduced to noise and motion, to breath and will. The storm beat at them mercilessly, and each minute felt like an eternity. But when dawn finally broke, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the wind eased into a weary sigh. Andrew stepped outside, mud clinging to his boots. The sky was a pale gray, the fields glistening with water. The barn had held. It leaned now more than before, a few boards splintered, but it still stood. Behind him, Lily emerged, shivering and soaked, her hair plastered to her face. "They're all okay," she said through chattering teeth. "Even Hope." He looked at her, at the girl who had faced the storm without fear, and something inside him broke open. He pulled her into his arms, his chest shaking with laughter and relief. "You did good," he whispered into her hair. "You did real good." They stood there for a long time, surrounded by the aftermath, the dripping eaves, the soft grunts of the animals settling again, the smell of wet earth that filled the air. For the first time since they'd returned, the ranch didn't feel like a graveyard. It felt alive, scarred and battered, but alive. The next morning the sun rose clear and bright, drying the puddles and warming the soaked earth. The land smelled rich and clean, as if it had been washed free of the past. Lily fed the animals, humming softly, while Andrew walked the perimeter of the fields. The fences were down in places, the house missing shingles, but it didn't matter. They had survived. That night, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee in his hands, Andrew watched the last light fade from the sky. Lily sat beside him, petting Shadow, her legs swinging idly. "Do you think it's always going to be this hard?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But hard isn't always bad. Sometimes it just means it's worth it." She leaned her head against his arm, and for a long time neither of them spoke. The stars began to appear, one by one, over the land that had once been lost to them. The wind moved gently through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, the horse whinnied softly, as if answering a call older than memory. Andrew closed his eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his daughter's breathing, the quiet sounds of life around them. He knew there would be more storms, more laughter from the town, more nights when doubt crept in like cold air through the cracks. But he also knew that he would face them now, not alone, but with her, and with the land that had chosen to let them stay. The house behind them groaned in the wind, but its sound was no longer mournful. It was a heartbeat, faint, yet strong, echoing across the fields. The Carter Ranch had endured another storm, and somewhere deep inside, so had he. The storm had left its mark on the land, but in the soft light of the following morning, it no longer looked wounded. It looked reborn. The air smelled of wet earth and grass, and the sky stretched wide and clean above the ranch, as if the heavens themselves had been washed. Andrew stood by the porch, his coffee cooling in his hand, and watched the sunlight creep slowly across the soaked fields. The barn still leaned, patched and scarred from the night's battle, but it was standing, and inside, life stirred again. The chickens rustled in the straw, the pigs grunted lazily, and the horse whinnied, calm and strong. Hope, the foal, stumbled on shaky legs in the corral, its coat glistening in the early light. Beside Andrew, Lily leaned against the railing, her hair still damp from the night before, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion that shadowed her small face. She held a piece of bread in her hand, breaking it in half and tossing bits to the chickens that gathered near the steps. "They made it," she said softly, her voice full of awe rather than surprise. "All of them." Andrew nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. So did we. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt older than time. Each sunrise brought new work, new aches, and new small victories. Andrew patched holes in the barn roof with salvaged tin and boards, his hands cut and bruised but steady. Lily tended the animals, growing more confident with every passing day. She had taken to feeding Hope from a bottle, laughing whenever the foal's eager mouth splattered milk down her arms. Shadow followed her everywhere, never letting her wander too far from sight. The ranch, once silent and broken, now hummed with sound, the rhythm of hooves, the lowing of cows, the scrape of a shovel, the laughter of a child. Food was still scarce. They lived off what little money Andrew had saved, and the kindness of neighbors, who despite their early skepticism had begun to soften. One morning, as he was hauling water from the well, a cart appeared at the gate. It was Bill Hanson again, though this time he wasn't alone. In the back of the wagon were 2 sacks of grain and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Hanson stepped down slowly, removing his hat. His face was unreadable. "Got extra feed this season?" he said, looking everywhere but at Andrew. "Figured you might use it." Andrew studied him for a moment before nodding. "I appreciate it." Hanson scratched his chin. "Heard you kept everything alive through that storm. Thought for sure it would have taken the roof clean off." "It tried," Andrew replied with a faint grin. "We held it together. Hanson finally looked him in the eye, something unspoken passing between them. Not friendship, not yet, but respect. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "guess some things don't die easy." When he left, Lily waved from the porch, and he raised his hand in return before driving off. The moment lingered with Andrew, long after the sound of wheels had faded. He realized then that the ranch was no longer just theirs. It was becoming part of the world again, a piece of the land reclaimed not through pride, but persistence. Spring gave way to summer, and the earth responded to their devotion. Grass rose thick and green across the fields, and wildflowers bloomed where ash had once settled. Lily planted a small patch of vegetables near the porch, tomatoes, beans, and corn, watching every sprout as if it were a miracle. She talked to the plants as she watered them, and Andrew, watching from a distance, felt a quiet contentment he hadn't known in years. He worked harder than he ever had before, and though his back ached and his hands were rough and scarred, his heart was light. The land, stubborn and scarred as it was, seemed to answer every gesture of care. Some evenings, neighbors came by, not to mock, but to offer help. An old man from town brought fence posts, saying he'd rather see them used than rotting in his shed. A woman brought jars of preserves and left them on the porch with a note that read, simply, "For those who stayed." Children sometimes came too, shy and curious, peering through the fence to watch Hope gallop clumsily in the corral. Lily would show them around, proud as if she had built the ranch herself. One afternoon, while clearing debris from the house, Andrew found something that made him pause. Hidden behind a collapsed wall near the old fireplace was a wooden box, its lid blackened by soot but still intact. He pried it open carefully, the hinges groaning, and inside he found relics of another life, photographs, yellowed letters, and at the bottom, a small leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked, but when he opened it, he saw handwriting he recognized instantly. It was his father's. The pages were filled with simple notes about the farm, weather, harvests, debts, and hopes. But on one page, near the end, the writing slowed, as if written late at night, by the light of a lantern. "The land only gives to those who love it without demand. Someday, this place will live again, not for profit, but for life." Andrew sat there for a long time, holding the book. The words felt like a hand reaching out from the past, steadying him. When Lily came to find him, he showed her the notebook. She ran her fingers over the faded ink and smiled. "It's like Grandpa left it for us," she said, "like he knew we'd come back." That night they read more of it together by the fire. The entries were plain, but filled with quiet faith, the kind that endures long after everything else falls away. Andrew realized then that his father had never truly left this land. He was still here, in the soil, in the wind that moved through the grass, in the very walls that had refused to fall. As summer deepened, the ranch grew stronger. The barn, though patched, stood firm. The fields shimmered under the sun, alive with motion. The animals thrived. Even the dogs, once gaunt and skittish, now moved with confidence. Hope grew quickly, playful and fearless, often chasing Lily through the field until both collapsed in laughter. The laughter of a child echoed through the land, and it felt like healing. In town, people began to talk differently. The same voices that had once doubted now spoke of Carter Ranch as a place reborn. When Andrew brought eggs or milk to sell, people greeted him not with pity or scorn, but with genuine respect. Some still whispered. Small towns never stop whispering. But their tone had changed. The man who was once called a fool was now called stubborn, and in that word there was admiration. But for Andrew, the reward was not in their words. It was in the quiet evenings, when the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in gold and fire, and the farm breathed around him. He would sit on the porch, coffee in hand, while Lily read aloud from the notebook or talked softly to the animals lying nearby. Those were the moments that made all the pain worth it. The seasons turned gently toward autumn. The air grew cooler, and the first hints of gold appeared in the grass. Andrew spent the days gathering stones for a new fence, his body moving with the steady rhythm of habit. Lily prepared jars of vegetables with the woman from town, who had become a friend. They worked until sunset, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the animals settling for the night. One evening, a group of riders appeared on the road, the sheriff from the county, and a man in a suit with a folder under his arm. They dismounted and approached the house, their boots crunching on the gravel. Andrew met them on the porch, wary. The sheriff, a tall man with honest eyes, tipped his hat. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we've come about the land." Andrew's stomach tightened. "If this is about the taxes, The man in the suit raised a hand. "It's not. We've reviewed your case. The property was listed as abandoned after the fire, but that was never corrected. Given the state of your restoration and the witness reports from town, the boards decided to reinstate the Carter Ranch as active farmland under your name." Andrew blinked, uncertain he'd heard right. "You mean, it's official again?" The man nodded, smiling faintly. "It's yours, Mr. Carter. It always should have been." The sheriff extended his hand. "Welcome back to the registry, Carter. You've done good work here." Andrew shook his hand, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you both." After they left, Lily came running out, her face alight with excitement. "We're really staying," he laughed, sweeping her into his arms. "We're really staying." From that day on, everything changed. The ranch was no longer a secret battle or a lonely dream. It was part of the world again, recognized, alive, and theirs. Andrew began planting new fields, planning for the future. Neighbors came to help dig irrigation ditches, to mend fences, to share seeds and stories. The laughter of others mingled with the sound of the wind, and the ranch, once forgotten, became a place of gathering. Years passed quietly. The house, though never perfect, stood strong. The roof no longer leaked, the windows glowed with lamplight in the evenings, and the smell of baking bread often drifted out into the yard. Hope grew into a magnificent horse, sleek and steady, carrying Lily across the pasture each morning. The dogs grew old but remained loyal, keeping watch at the porch steps. Andrew, his hair streaked with gray now, moved slower, but with the same calm determination as ever. The land had shaped him, and he had shaped it in return. One evening, as the sun sank low and the fields shimmered gold, Andrew sat on the porch with his daughter beside him. She was nearly grown now, her face thoughtful, her eyes bright with the same fire her mother had once carried. They sat in silence, watching the sky. The air was warm, filled with the hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Hope grazed nearby, and the other animals dozed peacefully. Lily reached for the old notebook, its pages soft and worn from years of reading. She turned to the last page, the one her grandfather had written before the storm that changed everything. "Listen to this again," she said, her voice quiet. "The land remembers those who love it. It will wait, and when they return, it will breathe again." Andrew smiled. He was right. They sat there until the last light faded, until the stars began to appear above the hills. The wind moved gently across the grass, carrying with it the scent of life, of memory, of peace. For the first time in decades, the Carter Ranch was everything it was meant to be. Not grand, not rich, but whole. Andrew looked out over the land, his heart full. He thought of the boy who had once left this place in fear, the man who had returned in sorrow, and the father who now sat in quiet triumph. He thought of the storms they had endured, the laughter they had found again, the home they had rebuilt with nothing but love and will. As darkness deepened, he closed his eyes and listened to the steady rhythm of breathing beside him, to the soft murmur of animals, to the whisper of the house behind him. It was not the silence of ruins anymore. It was the heartbeat of a living home, a home that remembered everything and forgave it all. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled again, but it no longer sounded like danger. It sounded like life continuing, strong, unbroken, eternal. Andrew smiled into the wind, the last of the sunlight catching his face. The house stood firm behind him, the field stretching endless before him, and in that moment he knew with absolute certainty that they had come full circle. The land had called them home, and this time they had stayed. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Watch our other videos for more powerful stories that stay with you. And don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a good story.